Professor Matthew Rotella, and in this tutorial I'm going to be covering camera matching in Maya for the purposes of compositing geometry onto surfaces. And I'm going to be going over your image, what to look for, and then how to go about the whole Maya setup, as well as the rendering utilities you'll need to render both your geometry and your shadows separately for the purposes of compositing into your image. So I have this image here that I'm going to be working with, and this image is, it's not a particularly difficult image to composite into, but it's also not the easiest. Things that are going to help you when you're going to composite into an image are your perspective lines and your verticals. So like this line here in the corner, the vertical that is like the corner of the desk, and then all of these perspective lines. And then what will really help you is, a lot of times my process is, if I can, I like to match the perspective of the room as a whole first, and then go in and place objects that would then fit in that space real nice. However, in this case, we don't have a whole lot of context for the room as a whole. We kind of just have this line for the corner, and there's a little bit of context running along down here, but like we can't see the floor and stuff like that, so we got to do a little bit of guesstimating. But regardless, let's begin. So here in Maya, what I'm going to want to start with is I'm just going to want to start with a polygon plane, since we are going to be in a room. And if you have the measurements of the room or what you're working with, all that will go a long way. I'm going to pretend that I don't have access to such a thing, and I can extrude this back edge, just yoink this up so that I have a corner of the room to composite into. And now what I want to do is I want to start setting up my camera to match to my picture. So go to Create, Cameras, Camera, and then I can go to Panels, Perspective, and look through my new render camera that I've made. And I can generally aim it at the corner to begin with, because that's where the space I'm going to be compositing into. And perhaps the first thing that I'm going to address before I even put my picture into here is I want to take a look at the focal length of my camera, and it's very important that you know the focal length of the camera that you're working with, because otherwise it's a whole nother layer of guesswork trying to figure out what the deal is, because if you're working with a higher focal length versus a lower focal length, it can change how your image and your perspective distorts dramatically. Now, I took this with an iPhone 8. I can see that my rear camera focal length on my iPhone 8 is 28 millimeters, just from a quick Google search, which results in some mild research. And so I can just plug in 28 into my focal length, and then what I could start doing as well is now it's time to start getting my image into my Maya scene. So Maya, or View, Image Plane, Import Image. Gonna navigate to my image, which is on here, and then in here, and then it is this one. I can hit Open. Now if I throw this into my wireframe view, I can see what's going on, and I can start matching to it. And then you can change how the camera fits, how the placement of this image plane fits into your viewport here, whether it be fill or best or vertical or what have you, and you can also have it fit to the resolution gate, which I just clicked on right here, and but now if I want my resolution to be the same, at least resolution aspect ratio as my gate right here, one way I could go about doing that is I could look at my image properties, and I could type that into Maya. I could go to my render settings, and I got my image size right down here, and then I'm going to be working with 4032 by 3024, so I could do 4032 by 3024. And now let's say I don't want to be rendering an image that size because that's an awful lot of pixels and therefore your renders would take a long time. So let's say I want to down-res it. I can always hit maintain width/height ratio, and I could say, limit my width to a 1920 width, and you can see my height down-resed or downscaled appropriately. And then now if I want, I can hit fit to resolution gate, and it fits right in there. Regardless, let's focus on the matching now. So what can help is you want to start like getting your verticals roughly matched up, so like I can start matching up to that corner there. And then another thing that's going to help you is some horizontal divisions in here. And perhaps I also, so I'll go back to my perspective camera, perhaps I also want to go about lengthening these edges up here, making this a bit taller, and then can help is inserting some subdivisions into here. Perhaps I'll throw in like 10 lines, and what that will give you are some other lines to help you start matching things up. And so you generally match that, and I can tell that I'm looking down at the table, and I want to try and match things up best I can. And you can also like adjust these edges specifically to help you with matching your camera. And another thing that will help you out a lot is if I go in my camera 1 here, and if I say tear off copy, and then I have my camera 1 that I'm matching into, which and I can look at my perspective here, and that way it can help me adjust various things. But yeah, so I can select things and sort of maneuver things there in my viewport, and alternatively I can move my camera here in my viewport and one, and sort of adjust things like so. But the important thing that you want to remember is that you want to move your camera, not your geometry. And because you're trying to match that perspective with your camera and then have everything with your geometry come together within it. And yeah, so I'll get a rough match, and now I'm gonna try and start roughing in. So like you can see, I kind of match here, kind of match on the vertical. I'm kind of matching down here and going along here, and I could kind of call it quits here, but the better of a match I get, the better my composite is going to look. So let me see. I'm going to get a rough of my desk into here, and I know it's going to be pretty close to the wall, which I can place it like so, and drag it along. And now, as I sort of rough this in, and certain lines match up, you can tell that while I'm not far, I'm still not particularly close either. And let me match up my thickness a little bit better. And so perhaps I can sort of retarget on adjusting to match in with my desk, which is, after all, which does have all the perspective lines that I would need, and having like verticals on the edges as well as this line running down. And now I can sort of adjust to that, and might want to end up, as I get rather particular, I might want to end up throwing this video into double speed, but whatever. I'm getting a pretty decent match right off the bat though, and that's actually none too shabby. Perhaps I'll want to well, one strategy that can be really great is if you match up a corner of something, and now with that corner matched, I'll select my camera and I'll move my camera's pivot to that corner so that I'm matching from that corner's pivot. Now mind you, like my camera could also be crooked, have like different pitch and yaw, because I didn't shoot this using a tripod, so I'm certainly not on a perfectly level camera as it currently is, so I'm likely going to have to adjust that. But regardless, I can pivot from this corner by holding down D, which will bring up the moving my camera's pivot tool, and then I can hold down V for vert snapping, and I could snap to this vertice that is the corner of my table. And now, when I use the rotate tool, I rotate from that corner when I adjust my camera. And I can sort of bring things together that way. Now, mind you, if I end up translating my camera, then my pivot will no longer be properly snapped to the corner, which you can see, and I would then have to recenter my pivot on the corner if I would now want to pivot from there again. However, that would certainly be more of a zoom than I need, it would seem. And let's see. Sort of. Which I'm almost getting there. And that's actually looking pretty good as far as like this perspective line and this perspective line. So then like I could try bringing in this face a little, but then I can see I'm still not matching up quite right here. So let me see. Swing it that way a bit. Let me try and match up that line just right. And modify, recenter my pivot here. And now once again, let me vert snap to the corner. And try and get this just right. Which I've definitely overcompensated in this direction, I'm gonna say. And whoa, 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 whoa. Let me see. Modify. Center pivot. And alright, and if I had the measurements of my table, this would actually be a lot easier, because then I can at least make sure that everything is the right scale before I try to do this, and that way I don't have to worry about, like, am I trying to match up to something where it's just never going to work because my table is just too small, or some such like that. But perhaps this will finally be correct. And let me try. Just bringing in this side, and that actually, oh, still not quite right. But that, well, let me see, I'm trying. Okay. And you can see that it can be real finicky. DUV, perhaps I'll snap to this back corner. And that'll probably about do it. If this just line up a touch nicer, which I gotta been translating, so and that'll about do it. Still not 100%, but that's reasonably perfect. Alright, so I'll just call it there, and now let's start getting everything set up for the whole rendering aspect of this. So, first, I'll make a light that can generally mimic what I'm working with here. I'll make an Arnold area light, and I'll make it the shape of a disc. And I can even go ahead and sort of match that into space as well, which I can do just by sort of just matching up the edge on the desk lamp here, and matching up that whole ellipse business. And I'm not going to worry about getting it too super perfect, but the general idea, just of course, being to match up the lighting in general. Let me turn up my intensity and let's see what I'm working with. Arnold render. Okay. And yeah, there it is. Which you can see, not a perfect match, but we're even getting that sort of cut up here, just like is showing up in our picture. But I'll call that good enough. Let's see. Turn off the IPR, and yeah, now let's just get something on the table, which. And also, now that we've spent so much time tediously placing our camera, what we can do to make sure that it doesn't move are we could do two things. One, you could key it by pressing the S key, and that'll key it in place. Or adversely, what you could use is your channel box, and you could just get all of these values and hit lock selected, and that will stop them from moving. You won't be able to adjust them at all. So like my camera is selected right now, and you can see I'm not allowed to use the manipulator because that attribute is locked. But anyway, now that everything's totally, now that my camera's matched, what I can do is, like, let's say I wanted to simulate some sort of bottle or can being next to these other bottles. Get this into view here. And yeah, and I can just sort of match that into space, which first let's make sure it's actually on the surface, so I'll just get it loosely clipping a little bit, but that's alright. And now when it renders, it ought render as if it fits perfectly into the space, which you can which if you did everything right, you can even start like roughing in geometry. Like if I were to like try to start mimicking this jar, and I can see like while keeping my geometry, of course all of this is totally level here, and yeah, all this is totally level here in my viewport, because of course I matched by changing my angle and not my geometry, that everything should be able to come together quite nicely. But regardless, I'm gonna go for placing something here, and let's not have it clipping. And now I could hit refresh render, and it's right there, which perhaps which my lighting seems like it could use some adjustment, perhaps. Let me see here. Whatever. I'm not going to worry about it too much, but it could definitely stand to be a touch brighter given the kind of highlights that we're dealing with here. What now? And maybe I'll just bump it up a stop. So maybe exposure of 6. Let's throw that into the side. Okay. Anyway, so I got it rendering how I want to. Now let's start putting our utilities in place so that this can all render, so that this can render, and I don't have all this extra geometry in place, and I can just get just this shadow. So, all right. So, port render. Alright, so here's my default screenshot of my item. And now let's keep it going. So now what we're going to want to make is we're going to go into our hypershade, and we're going to go down to the Arnold shaders, and there's this utility, aishadowmatte. Now with this, what you want to do with this is you want to put it on all of the things that you want to catch shadows. So, assign material to selection. I want those two things to be my shadow mat. And you can see, actually, that it's catching my shadow, and you can see actually that it's catching my shadow while all of that geometry isn't rendering, and already I kind of have the illusion as if I'm rendering onto my image. However, I don't necessarily want to have my image captured in my render, so what I will instead do is, and now I can close my hypershade also, because I don't need to apply the shadow matte to anything else, and I'm not going to be making any other shaders in this tutorial. But to have my image plane not render, I can go into here, and I can go to display mode, none. And now it doesn't render in my viewport. But you can see, if I look at my alpha channel, that my shadow is still being rendered. Now you can also see though that it's catching the shadow from my table being cast onto my floor. I do not want that to be happening, so let me store snapshot. And to prevent that from happening, what I can do is I can select my table geometry, go to Arnold, and then I can turn off cast shadows. Now that cast shadow goes away from my table, and you can still see that my cylinder is rendering, but I'll store a snapshot of that. And now, if I want to get a render of just my shadows, what I can do is I can get this geometry, the cylinder, and turn off primary visibility. I want cast shadows because that's the whole reason I'm rendering this. And then I'll hit refresh render. And it looks like I'm not rendering anything, but I am. If I look at my alpha channel, I can see that I'm rendering just the shadow of my geometry. Alright, and now this I will I'll also store a snapshot of this, and basically I can Alright, now I'm gonna get one more render, but this time I'm gonna get it of just my cylinder and without a shadow. So what I'm gonna do this time is I'm gonna turn on primary visibility and get rid of cast shadows and render. render, refresh render, and I can see now here, just I'll let it finish up here. Get rid of all my noise. Okay. And that'll be about that. Okay. So now here I have just my cylinder, and you can see if I look at my alpha channel that I have just my cylinder. Now in this snapshot, where I turned off my primary visibility, but I still have cast shadows on and my Shadowmatte, I get just my shadow without my cylinder. And then here, in this one, if I look at my alpha channel, I have both my cylinder and my shadow being caught by my geometry, because I have the Shadowmatte utility on, and I have the primary visibility on of my cylinder. And then if I were to look at this one, I even get the shadow from my table, because my table is still set to cast shadows, and that's with the different utilities on from this one, which is of course our original vanilla render of our shot. Okay, anyway, I'm going to save this one of just my cylinder, file, save image, pictures, and I'll go cylinder, yeah, just cylinder, .png, and save a PNG of it, but you can save the multi-channel EXR if you need all your render passes for one reason or another. This one should be just my shadow, file, save image. It's going to be going into my pictures, and cylinder, shadow.png, save. Alright, and now let's bring it all together. So here in Photoshop, I can do camera matching demo, open up my desk here, and now let's just bring in my images that I have, which I have some previous ones, which I suppose I can bring in those as well. So bring in these two. Place my cylinder over top of it, which that generally kind of matches up alright, but it ought match up better if Alright, and yeah, so there's my old one. Now let's bring in the one that I just rendered, which should be in my pictures. And I'll just sort it by date even. Bring in these two. And scale it up. Scale it out. Alright, yeah. And perhaps when I did my lighting in my practice run, this matched up a bit better than this does, but regardless, the main thing is that the perspective is matching the way I want it to, and that I'm able to get my shadows that I can use to composite my geometry onto my surfaces. Alright. Well, hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching, and hope you learned.